Hello and welcome to Wenta's Action Zero Bronze Taster webinar on climate science. So my name is Michael Martin, and I head up the advisory team at Wenta and also our Action Zero initiative. And I'll be taking you through the next 30 minutes of what it says, which is a taster of good things to come. And so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Those who have joined live, those who have registered for the recording, do appreciate it's not always possible to make a live event. But for those who have, thank you very much for making time. Do please make notes as we go. And you will be getting a copy of the recording, though, and also a copy of the slide presentation. Feel free to ask questions as we go. So for those live, hover the mouse at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, whatever your operating system, and there is a chat feature. If you'd like to drop a line in chat, if it's marked for everyone, everyone will see that, and an opportunity to network, say a little bit about your venture if you wish, what stage you're at, if you're thinking about starting up or already running. And if you're just would like to send it to myself, toggle to hosts and panelists, only I will see that. And I'll keep that in good faith. Thank you very much. The purpose of our half an hour together is to provide a brief introduction to some of the considerations in climate science, environmental sustainability. In other words, looking after the planet, looking after ourselves, looking after our businesses in a greener way. Thank you for taking the first step in subscribing to our bronze level of membership of Action Zero. We are all experienced advisors, so in a business context, in a social enterprise context, charitable context. And so this is not an exercise really so much of sharing in an environmental scientist way. It's about making it accessible and relevant for you to action every day in what you do in your venture. And so the main thing is to be feeling a little bit more confident with some of the terminology, so that when you're potentially in conversation with people, beyond simply conversations about the weather, you're getting an insight into how best to share views without ramming the science down people's throats. Because bluntly, if that worked, why have we got a climate emergency? So this is more about feeling confident in talking with people and listening to their views, your clientele, your colleagues, your supply chain, your stakeholders, and to understand a little bit more about why there is an urgency and what the benefits are actually for your business case. Okay, so my style of presentation is that I won't be reading word for word everything that's on a slide. I'll give you a moment or two to read and absorb the information, and then I'll talk around what you see on the slide. There will be some imagery of charts, of tables, to help display some of the data. But as I say, do feel free to ask questions as we go, for those of you who are live. And of course, you can book in. We would look forward to having a conversation with you. And I'll be giving you these contact details again at the end of the session, but you can contact us in the UK 01438 310020. That's 01438 310020. Or you can email us info@wenta.co.uk. So I will be explaining some of these terms, some of the acronyms. So for example, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we're going to begin, as I say, with an introduction, a very basic level of awareness. And to start with, that is some of the the terminology. So you may be someone who feels quite strongly, almost evangelical about the need for climate action. And by that, I mean action to reduce emissions, to lead a more sustainable life as distinct from climate activism. And so for some of you, though, possibly what we might say is sitting on the fence, not really sure. Is it real? Is it something that's going to impact me? Is there a benefit if I do something? There are, of course, people who are opposed to the notion that there's any sort of problem and consider it even perhaps a hoax. We understand that. Probability is if you're one of those people, you wouldn't have registered for this webinar. However, the most important thing is that there's a prompt to consider, okay, how might this benefit? What might I be missing out on if I don't do anything? And is there any help along the way to get me to a point when I'm ready to take action? That is what we are here for. The purpose of Wenta's involvement is for the benefit of our clientele, for the benefit of our workforce, for the benefit of our community. And we felt in looking at our own journey that, yes, there's a cost implication of rising energy bills, the implication of more efficient ways of doing business and how that can benefit. And so there may be, we understand, if there are economic drivers for you taking these steps, and oh, by the way, there happens to be an environmental benefit, okay, fine. It may be you are acutely aware of the changes in climate and the impact it's having in your local community. And this is why it's important not just to see it in pure business terms or commercial terms. Okay, so the two key areas that we explore of relevance for smaller businesses, for owner managers, for micro ventures, because let's face it, most of the resources out there are for major organizations because they're the major emitters. For you, potentially involved in running a smaller venture, it's the steps that you can take that are practical and relevant. But it does begin with understanding at what point are you adapting your activities because of climate change, and what are the things you could be doing to reduce its impact. And that brings us back to this point about the day-to-day and the distinction between weather and climate. And yes, there are some complexities in deciding if there is a link between extreme weather events. So the patterns are therefore longer to be observing rather than just the day-to-day. We can say in the UK that more recently there's been more extreme weather. For example, in 2023 in the UK, for the first time, 40 degrees Celsius temperatures. We know that it was the record number of winter storms, named storms, at the beginning of 2024. 10 or 11 named storms, which hasn't happened before. It was the first year in recorded history that we have the average mean temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial revolution era. Now, that in itself does not mean we have now missed the opportunity to keep it below that, because the time frame for that is generally thought to be in the region of anywhere between 10 to 20 to 30 years, where it's sustained. However, the intensity and frequency of an extreme weather event is something that we are able to track. And we know that there's greater evidence that small changes in temperature can have large consequences. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you is mainly pictorial, and I'll leave you for a moment just to absorb the information, and then I'll clarify what it all means. And the carbon cycle is something that was in balance for millennia, epochs. And carbon is a part of all living things. You may have heard the expression net zero in relation to carbon emissions. That's covered in our gold level of membership, more so for those of you who are ready to take action, to have carbon footprinting undertaken, to develop an action plan. The silver level of content is helping you familiarize more with the science, mainly though in relation to looking for the business opportunities in a greener economy, avoiding greenwash, and developing the language that helps position your venture positively with greener credentials. And so the phrase net zero does not mean zero emissions. The planet actually needs some emissions. That's what kept the carbon cycle in balance for millennia. And carbon is converted as part of the carbon cycle in the ocean, what we refer to as the biosphere and then the atmosphere. And carbon then accumulates in the atmosphere around the Earth, a little bit like a blanket. And indeed, in more recent years, it's become known as the greenhouse gas effect, in that the Industrial Revolution, it is now known, has upset the long-standing carbon cycle because of increased global emissions, which leads to global warming. And the primary reasons for this are deforestation and the use of fossil fuels. And therefore, the carbon cycle cannot really be rebalanced until we stop creating new greenhouse gas emissions and we find ways to remove the existing emissions from the atmosphere. So we're going to look at what some of these numbers mean next to the wording. And what it's linked to is the potency or toxicity of individual greenhouse gases, the main ones of which we are showing you here. So, the most common is of the types of greenhouse gases is carbon dioxide with the chemical symbol of CO2. And it's given a base number of 1, which refers to its potency, or what's also known as its global warming potential. And approximately 80% of the atmosphere comprises carbon dioxide and is known to be in the atmosphere for at least 100 years. So if we think about going back to 1924, here we are in 2024, okay, what was a significant development in the 1920s? Well, I would suggest, and many of the climate scientists would suggest, that it was the beginning of mass-produced vehicles. So we can use an example of Henry Ford's Model T Fords, which you could have in any color you like, so long as it was black. Well, the emissions from those first Model T Fords are still in the atmosphere. I think how many vehicles have been produced since then. Think how much burning of fossil fuels there has been since then. Now, the next one in the list from the left-hand side is methane with the chemical symbol CH4. And that has a global warming potential of 28. In other words, it's 28 times more potent. The effect of carbon dioxide equates to approximately 12% of greenhouse gas emissions, largely caused by agriculture and landfill, and typically is in the atmosphere for about a decade or so. With nitrous oxide, N2O, 265 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and equates to about 5% of greenhouse gas emissions caused primarily by farming and industrial processes. And the F gases, of which there are several, can be anything up to tens of thousands of times more toxic than CO2. Less present in the atmosphere than the others, about 3%, and arise primarily from refrigerants, freezing, air conditioning. So examples of those would be what are called perfluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, and clearly, if we think back to the times when it used to be known as a hole in the ozone layer and the banning of certain types of gases, CFCs, is part of the reason. Now, where all of this information comes from, apart from chemists within the sciences, is a United Nations body called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they've been reporting for a number of years on the changes that they have been documenting in climate. But global warming, without all the details, has been predicted for at least 70 years. Part of the issue was that the science was quite fragmented, often contradictory, as science can be. So for many years, people denied it, denied what was then called global warming. And yet, speaking candidly, some industries have a vested interest in denying climate change. And if we think about the most recent meeting of the nations who have signed up to agreements over the years, known as the Conference of the Parties, who meet annually to discuss the latest findings and to agree actions, with the last one in December of 2023, COP28, 28th time they met, still with the argument about whether dependency on fossil fuel should be phased down or phased out, held in a country in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, in which the president of COP28 is working for one of the largest petrochemical companies in the world. So There are simply industries and countries that are reluctant or unable for economic reasons to admit or commit to reducing their carbon emissions. It first began to change around 1988, when actually the IPCC was created. And this is an example of one of the reports in recent years. By all means, feel free to go check these out. In your preferred search engine, you'll find this information, but we have a lot of the resources available within Action Zero, and we're making this available for you as part of membership. It represents the most robust source of climate science and global commentary on climate change. Okay, now we've looked at a graph or two. I'm going to show you two together now over a far longer period of time than just 5 to 7 years. So on the left-hand side is a graph that depicts a pretty long period of time throughout colder and warmer cycles over the 800,000 years of atmospheric carbon dioxide. It was never higher than 300 parts per million. And in 2019, it reached greater than 400 parts per million. I should point out at this point that in looking at the gases collectively, when they're referred to collectively, the way that how that is expressed, you may see this in mainstream media and in scientific papers, as CO2e, with a little e after the little 2. And that means equivalence. Okay. This particular graph is about CO2, just carbon dioxide, not all of the others. But of course, everything else is there. And I also should point out that it's not the only things that are in the atmosphere. There are many pollutants, toxins, poisons that are not actually counted when we talk about carbon emission reduction. So air quality is a consideration for a variety of reasons. And why we're showing this together with a second graphic on the right shows levels of warming over the last 2,000 years. And the uptick in warming between 1850 and 2020 matches the uptick in CO2 emissions in the graph on the left. In other words, they demonstrate the link between greater warming and greater CO2 emissions. Now, a key thing here, if you're looking at the graph, is that there is a point that's referenced, which is 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial era. What's been observed is that this is now somewhere around the 1.2 to 1.3 degrees of global warming as an average. Point being, if we still need persuading that global warming is still heading in the wrong direction, this is it. And here's some more indications. Now, if this seems sobering, daunting, should we be concerned? We would eventually, yes. Climate change is always occurring. Civilization generally finds a way to adapt. It's the speed and scale of the changes that we're facing today that is, to use that word, unprecedented. Again, we just need to look at, 2023, significant counts right across the globe with rapid change to Arctic sea levels, ice levels, glacier retreat. And similarly in what are referred to as nature's crucial services, which is a bit of a scientific statement of the beauty of planet Earth. Its systems, as it's known, nature. And again, this is a taster without getting into the detail of it at this stage, but we know that all of these areas are affected and under threat from increasing sea level, deoxygenation, acidification. Salt water can destroy agricultural land, local habitats, people's accommodation, their livelihoods. And so these are risk areas. And I can think back to actually last year, more than 12 months ago, really, January, February of 2023, and local supermarkets in the UK with shelving stripped. There were, no lettuces, cucumbers, just not there. And the reasons given had less to do with the cost of living crisis. It had more to do with poor crops and climate change. And the impact here is not just on a few thousand people, even a few million people. The impact is on all of us on planet Earth, billions of people. Okay, so you are signing up to this in a business context, in a social enterprise context, and that means a creative entrepreneurial mindset. What can we do about all of this? So there are natural climate solutions. We have several webinars within the silver level of membership with Action Zero that go into these in more detail, and more particularly the business opportunities with them. As very natural processes, what we are at pains to point out is that there isn't an option. We would not encourage an option of business as usual, and all you need to do is pay somebody to plant a few trees. Probably one of the worst forms of greenwash there could be. It would reflect terribly on your brand reputation if that was your approach. However, every little helps. And yes, there are ways to go around tree planting and an approach to carbon offset that's responsible when we are looking to look at habitually change how we do things to be more sustainable. First, what can we reduce without relying on those things? It has to be both and, not either or. So we go into more detail about this in silver content and the opportunities, how you can embrace it. Similarly, there are technical solutions, increasingly so. Some of them are very experimental. Some of them are, frankly, deeply questionable, without evidence of their effectiveness and even potential harm. And yet we do know that there are things that are working, and there are incentives, huge financial incentives, to those people who can develop carbon capture and storage methodologies and technologies. We cannot simply sit back and think, well, by 2050, it's fine. Somebody will have sorted this all out. We're all okay. We all have a responsibility to be contributing in some way, switching to some of these technologies, even if we're not the ones developing them. And we can provide some insight into how best to embrace that. And this is what we have covered this afternoon live. Thank you very much for making time, those of you who have. And this contributes as part of your validated journey by attending the webinars or registering for the webinars and watching the recordings. And we look forward to welcoming you to Climate Scenarios Taster if you haven't yet watched it. and then on to getting in touch. Please do get in touch. We're here to help. We'd like to be able to tailor this to your circumstances, your particular challenges, your particular opportunities. In the UK, there's an element of funding opportunities. We'd like to be seeing more, of course, at the start of the new financial year, 24-25. We're hopeful that there could be more opportunities for grant funding, not just loans and investment. Best way to find out what is available for you is give us a call. 01438 in the UK, 310020, and info@wenta.co.uk. Thank you, very much appreciated. We look forward to conversation. My name is Michael Martin, head of Net Zero and the advice team at Wenta. I shall bid you good afternoon for those live in the UK. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be elsewhere, live and also watching the recording. Thank you. All the very best.